Hey, this video is entitled The Process of Progress Monitoring. And what we're going to do is walk back from what we're looking at right now. What we're looking at right now is the end product that we want to make data-based, data-driven decisions about the instruction and supports we're providing to real students. So to get completely concrete about it, literally those lines represent a change in instruction or practices around real students, in this case, real students that I've worked with. And that's the end product that we want, is for a group of teachers and educators around a table to agree that based on what we're seeing and what we know about the student and their skill progress, their learning progress, we need to make X change in order to change the literal trajectory of their learning and their progress. And like I said, from here, we're going to back up and talk about how we actually get here, because it does not happen on its own. It involves a lot of coordination and infrastructure that's not reliant on a single person. It's reliant on teamwork and planning. So this chart we're going to walk through step by step basically represents the general steps, layers of the process of how you actually get to what we were just looking at. So the first layer here is to identify the student's needs and what skills we're going to teach them. So in our intervention with this student, what are we going to teach them? And in this case, I am an SEL-focused person, interventionist, so that's what I picked here. But this is just a map that's not tied to any specific curriculum. It's just meant to communicate the general concept that a lot of the skills we're teaching students, regardless if it's math, literacy, social emotional learning, any other content area, we're teaching them skills, right? And we're building their proficiency in multiple skills, and the skills relate to and connect to each other. And we're teaching students a lot of different skills. Again, regardless of math, literacy, social emotional learning, our intervention is going to target quite a few skills that all connect to each other. So we have to identify with our specific intervention which skills are we targeting for this student. And then more narrow than that, what skills, and being deliberate with this, what skills are we actually going to measure? Because if you are a special education teacher, it might have given you hives to look at this map and think, oh my gosh, I have to write IEP goals around the 15 things that are on this slide. Well, that's not the case. And we know if we pause and lower that cortisol and adrenaline level in our brains, we know that we're going to be teaching the student and building up quite a few more skills than what we can ever reasonably measure on an IEP, or if it's a gen ed intervention. We have to teach far more things than we can faithfully and do a good job measuring with progress monitoring data. Okay? So that's where the deliberateness comes in, because we have to intentionally isolate kind of like what is going to be the overall barometer, or barometers, but a smaller number of barometers that as they rise and fall are going to be indicative of the student's overall learning in that area. So again, we're looking at social emotional learning skills. I could not measure with progress monitoring tools. I guess I could, but I'm not going to, all of these skills. So I have to be intentional and deliberate about which skill or skills are going to be that overall barometer that, again, are indicative of the whole. And the same thing is true for mathematics, for literacy, for other learning areas. So once we get past that, we have to decide what tools, actual artifacts, we're actually going to use to measure the student's skill growth. And then we have to plan the logistics of using those tools to collect the data. So this, I'm not going to explain all these, but I invite you to pause the video and study what's here. This is an overall representative look at the types of tools we would use, regardless of math, literacy, social emotional learning, functional academic skills. Again, this is very generic and comprehensive. Don't take my word for it. I worked on this with a couple of colleagues who are far more expert in some of these areas than I am. An overall representation of the categories of tools that we would use to measure student progress in virtually any learning area. And again, I invite you to pause if you'd like to study more. But then even once we've looked at those tools, we have these logistical questions to work out. It's not enough to have that item, it's how are we going to use it? So some questions to ponder: where and how? So for example, an academic probe, is that going to be administered like when? On Fridays during the small group intervention instruction? Is going to be the student pulled out by a para to take that academic assessment? Just where? And then when you get to the how, for example, there's 2 rating scales on the bottom left there, and the one that's on the computer is designed to be sent electronically to general education teachers for the most part, for them to rate things that they can see, like in this case, following instructions. So across the entire school day, we want a reading on how frequently the student is following instructions. The other one is a piece of paper, and it's meant very differently. It looks similar, but it's very different how. The how for that piece of paper is a person who teaches that student study skills and organizational skills in one block of that student's day. They're the single rater, and they look at the overall data they have around how the student is keeping track of their tasks and prioritizing tasks across classes, and they are the single rater. So the how really matters, and it is somewhat dependent on what we're trying to measure. You saw the difference there between following instructions, something that everyone can see all day long, and organizational skills, something that's a little bit harder to just get an accurate read on. Then you have a question like, who? So what we're looking at right now is in a website called EduClimber, when we're setting up graphs like the one that we looked at the very beginning of this video, when we set those up, one choice we make is who is going to be, which person going to be entering the scores and actually monitoring the student's progress, entering the data points. So we're making that decision, and that's very important because one example you have on the bottom of this slide is a real person, a real paraprofessional in this case, where multiple teachers have assigned them as the monitoring user. And because that happened, and because that's part of their plan, this paraprofessional can click one button and pull up students from multiple different special education teachers and enter data points, scores for all those students in one place without having to poke around and click a bunch of different buttons. That is a plan that was made and executed. So that who and being deliberate with it so that you are sustainable with what you're planning is very important and critical for success. And then questions like when. You see I left the same image on the bottom there because another decision that was made in that particular example is that on specific days of the week, in this case it was November 26th, that's a specific day of the week. So when people were setting up their progress monitoring, see that top right there, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, a group of teachers made a decision to all pick the same day of the week, again, so that paraprofessional was able to click this one button and pull up all the students. So these logistical considerations are very critical in order to make people's lives easier and make our practices sustainable and meaningful. So logistics, real important. Then following through on collecting the data. So think about everything that I just said and how important those decisions that were made around the where, the how, the who. Think about how important that is to setting us up to actually execute our plan and actually every week be collecting the data that we need to collect, following through. Another thing to just add to that is just what if. So say that you're running an academic intervention and students are going to be absent. So if a student misses a couple of days and you typically administer a probe on one of those days they missed, that data isn't there. What's our game plan for catching that and making sure that we get ongoing data for that student? So think about what ifs. Then actually graphing the data. And you see I came back to that same screenshot because everything that we've made, every decision that I've alluded to up to this point sets us up to think about that person sitting in that chair, opening their laptop, their Chromebook, opening up the program, the website to enter scores. all of the decisions we made up to this point set this person up to be very successful and their job to be much lighter because they can look at specific days that are predictable, days of the week, click one button and pull up a lot of students from multiple teachers, multiple special education teachers, and it makes this job of entering data and getting it onto those graphs very easy, relatively speaking. And then finally, we get to that place where we were at the beginning, where we actually have meaning. So we visually analyze the data. We don't just look at the raw numbers, but we visually analyze it and use it to make data-based decisions about real students and the real supports and instruction that they're receiving. So again, coming back to that image we looked at the beginning, those lines represent literal data-driven decisions that a group of people collectively decided based on their objective reading of this graph, this visual representation of data on a student's real learning. They looked at that and decided we need to make a change. They made a decision deliberately about what that change to instruction or the supports around the student was going to be. And then we moved on from there and saw a real effect on this student's real performance and learning. And that, my friends, is what it is all about. Thank you so much.